Okay. Jai. So here's part one for our introduction to mediation. So the outline for the class this morning, we have first a little overview of alternative dispute resolution, the benefits of mediation, the process of mediation, and as time allows, we'll talk about skills and practice, but this morning we're probably not going to get into it that deeply, but we will cover the first three. So when there is a conflict, four things might happen. People might avoid it. They might figure out how to collaborate. They might go to some authority for a resolution, or they may try to use unilateral force, from hierarchical to physical to legal. So our area of dispute resolution, alternative dispute resolution is to learn how to collaborate. There's three ways, three basic areas of collaboration practices. Arbitration means when both parties agree that whatever the third person decides, we will accept it. So this is called like binding arbitration, and the arbitrator has the power to decide. That's not mediation. Ombuds means a person in an organization who receives complaints and then helps the complainant figure out different options for dealing with them. And finally, there is mediation. So that's our focus, obviously, this morning. Mediation is a collaborative way of coming to an agreement between two disputing parties. Now, mediation is a facilitated conversation that is empowering, that is efficient, that is much better than being angry, and that has the effect of healing conflicts. What mediation is not is a trial, who's right and who's wrong. Manipulation, I'm going to try to get you to do it my way. Coercion, you have to do what I say. That's arbitration. It's not expensive. It can be done for free by a skilled person. But it's not always beneficial. Or in other words, it does not always resolve the issue. We have to know that. It's always beneficial in a sense that it gets people talking to one another. So, and when we are going into a mediation, these are the 5 steps. And again, we'll have this PowerPoint for you if you want to go in to have it on reference. We'll write it down as we're going. First is making an opening statement. Preparation, setting up the environment, and then making an opening statement to the disputants. Then allowing each person, and this is the most important thing, if you don't learn anything else from the class this morning, just learn this. When you start resolving the conflict, the first thing is to let each person completely tell their story uninterruptedly. Uninterrupted time, both parties, equal time, equal opportunity. That obviously, common sense tells us that gets people the opportunity to listen to one another, right? In a structured way. So uninterrupted time, and then the facilitator, the mediator, then has some exchange. And if necessary, the mediator will take the two parties apart and speak to them privately. So that's how all the information comes to the mediator or facilitator. After assimilating all the information, the mediator then identifies the main issues in an agenda. Many times disputes can bubble over into a variety of other topics that are not really related to the main issue. You know, ad hominem arguments, criticizing one another. Well, you did this to me. Well, you did that to me. That's all irrelevant. What is really our goal is to identify and resolve the main issue creating the conflict at the moment. Next step is generating movement, that is negotiating and building an agreement, looking for ways and looking for places that the two parties can find common ground, and then working on them together or usually privately to get them to compromise a little bit so a solution can be reached. So we'll talk about that in some detail. That's where the skills really come in that you can gain from this study. And in the end, we really want to make sure to write an agreement and wrap it up nicely. Okay, any questions on these before we begin in detail? Okay. So, preparing our meeting, our dispute resolution meeting. First, this place needs to be private. It is a confidential environment. So it must be somewhere private. Next, everybody needs to have a pen and paper in front of them, both disputants and the mediator. That's very important. And finally, the seating should be equitable. One seat should not be higher than the other, at least between the disputants. They should have equal and common facilities. This creates the appropriate mood for entering the mediation. These are physical things, common sense things that can be done. But again, the skill you learned this morning is you do this before sitting down with the people who are arguing. You make sure that there is an appropriate environment and equipment. Okay, so then to start the mediation, these are three things to identify. First, what is my role here as a mediator? I'm not here to resolve this, to decide who's right or who's wrong. I am here to help you discuss between yourselves and see if you can come to a resolution. Next is everything we say here is confidential, and we ask people to agree, to nod their heads. Do we all agree this is confidential, that we will not take any of this discussion outside of the three of us or outside of this room unless we give specific permission? And getting the parties to nod on that is important. And finally, the ground rules. This gets back to the uninterrupted time. So we're going to start our discussion by allowing each person to completely tell their story, their side of the issue. And while they're telling their side of the issue, the other person will just listen. You can make notes, you can write things down, but you cannot speak while the other person is speaking. Do we agree? Again, getting a nod of the head. This is the ground rules for how we're going to proceed. Okay, any questions? This is all before we start the discussion. Few simple things, common sense things. Okay, now we go into the gathering information phase, as I mentioned. So uninterrupted time allows each person to tell their whole story. How do we know who to start with? Any common sense thoughts? Who do you think you might start with? You're sitting with two parties who are fighting. Who might you start with?
Whoever is most angry or most agitated.
Very good. Yes. Whoever is the most agitated. However, you don't say, well, I usually start with whoever's the most agitated. And say, I usually start with the person on my right or my left, as the case may be. But within yourself, you know, better to let that person vent first. So in the course of their venting, the other person will usually be scribbling furiously on their pad, and that's all right. But they will tell their story, and your job at that point is to ask open-ended questions to draw out the story. How did you feel? What did you do? So usually they don't need a lot of coaching or coaxing to speak. However, when they become repetitious, then you need to use closed-ended questions. They've been over the story, you've heard everything, and then they start to repeat themselves. Then you can come in with a question like this. Okay, you said that this person did that. I understand. Is there anything else? You summarize in your own words what you've heard, and then ask that closed question. Is there anything else? Yes or no? Okay, this is how you put the brakes on when people are ranting. You assimilate what they've said, and as soon as they start repeating, you put on the brakes with the closed question. Okay, is there anything else? Then they might come up with something else, and you add that to your information gathering. Okay, very good. Now I've heard you said A, and I've heard you said B. Is there anything else? In this way, you keep the conversation under control. Remember, whoever is asking questions is controlling the conversation. Open-ended questions, starting with how or what, encourage people to talk. Closed-ended questions, encourage them to stop talking. So one party speaks, the other's scribbling. We close that conversation, then we open the other one. Okay, how do you feel about what you've just heard? And then they get to vent, and they get to say their side of the story. And again, as a facilitator, you're asking open-ended questions, you're probing, you're getting all the facts, you're digging out as much as you can. Sometimes people will be reluctant. They'll be reluctant to speak because they've just been, especially devotees, they just feel like everything I've heard is just so ridiculous, I don't even want to respond to it. Anything I say is just going to be, just adding fuel to the fire. I don't want to be offensive. I know it's not Krishna conscious to criticize or to find fault, so I'm not going to. Then you have to dig it out. You have to dig it out because it's very important that they express fully how they feel about the situation. You might be tempted to feel, wow, well, this person's being very humble. I guess I've really resolved this dispute. But it doesn't work that way. They are still holding on to these feelings. So it's important. Yes, Prabhu.
Is it considered to be judgmental if we point out that a certain devotee, as we have felt wronged by a devotee? Is this an offense by all means?
It may or may not be. It is a real feeling, however. So the feelings are reality. So our service as mediators is to make sure that feelings are expressed. I feel it. So we ask open-ended questions. How did you feel when this happened? How did you feel when you heard what he said just now? How did that make you feel? What was going through your mind? Getting people to express their feelings is what happens during uninterrupted time. And if they're reluctant, we keep stressing, remember, this is confidential. This is just among us. So, okay. Does that, Dr. Michael, where are you, by the way, Prabhu?
I'm in Montreal.
Montreal. Nice to meet you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
All right. So, any other questions about uninterrupted time? This is the part, if nothing else you get this morning, remember this. Have the two parties sit down and tell each other their stories and draw them out. Okay, so yes, Kartikeya.
Yeah, is it all right if there's one of the parties is like really agitated and is even though they've agreed to not interrupt, they can't control themselves, like they're just still going, and is it possible to call like a timeout and then like pull them off to the side and just say, hey, like you agreed to this, or is it best to do it right there and then?
Do it right there, absolutely. Do it right. As soon as they speak up, you stop them. Remember, this is uninterrupted time. Remember, the other person listened while you were speaking. Now you listen while he's speaking. Okay. You got to be assertive. And you get this agreement in advance. You see, remember, that's when we talk about the ground rules. The ground rules. We set this all up. We made sure we got nodding of the heads. We got people to agree. So this is something that they've already bought into. And you have to be like a tiger, because you're absolutely right. They will want to blurt out stuff. Okay. So
isn't it that they'll get a chance again after?
Yes.
You just tell them, wait, you'll have another chance to speak when that person's done.
That's correct. We in the ground rules, we go through these three things. We're going to each speak, then we'll have a chance to discuss as a group, and I may want to meet with you privately to discuss certain aspects of the conflict. Okay? This is the ground rules that people agree to up front. Uninterrupted time, time to discuss, and then possibly private meetings. Okay, so the exchange is now people are free to speak. And this can be an emotional exchange, sometimes a heated exchange. So after person A has done his uninterrupted time, then person B does theirs. Then you turn back to person A and start the exchange by an open-ended question. So what did you think of what you just heard? And again, person A stands for agitated. They have a lot to say. Generally, they'll speak. And that, again, you have to go to person B and make sure that they're participating. So you may have to toss in, okay, well, what do you think of what he's saying? How do you feel about this? And get them to talk to each other. Now, when they're looking at each other and talking and not looking at you, that's a good thing. During the uninterrupted time, they're looking at you. But when they're talking to each other, even if they're angry, that's progress. Okay? And we don't have to be afraid of it getting heated. If it gets violent, then we have to intervene. If it gets profane and ad hominem, just attacking each other's character, we have to intervene. But as long as they're talking about the dispute, well, what about this? What about that? Then we're doing well. Okay, after the exchange period gets repetitious, in other words, which often happens, sometimes just having this exchange, you'll get to a resolution. In fact, often you'll get to a resolution, especially if you see something as a facilitator. Well, what about if you each ate half of the rascula? What if you split the rascula and each ate half? What do you think? You can sometimes toss out ideas, or sometimes you'll hear one of the disputants say, all right. What if I eat half of the rascula and you eat the other half? Then immediately you seize on that, turn to the other person. Well, what do you think of that idea? So in this way, you can get agreements to come when they are talking to each other. So if you again, just get this much out of the class this morning, uninterrupted time and exchange, you'll know how to handle any dispute, at least to a certain point. And I hope that you'll feel empowered after learning these very simple techniques to say, okay, let's talk about this. John, okay.
Prabhu,
Yes.
is there like a time limit that we should give them to speak?
No, it's all based on repetition, being repetitious, Alex Prabhu. In their uninterrupted time, when they start repeating themselves, we cut them off. And if the exchange is going nowhere and going in circles, we cut them off. So how do we cut? Okay, how do we cut off an exchange? That is where we get to the private meetings. We see that they're talking to each other, but they're not making any headway. And we say, okay, let's step aside. And this is also related to preparation, that there needs to be a quiet, remote place where the person who is not in the private meetings can go and wait. You don't want them listening outside the door. So, go outside and chant for a while, or go outside and read, and I'll call you when we're ready. And the private meetings also have to be equal. If you give time to one, you have to give time to the other. Okay, even if it doesn't seem necessary, you got to be balanced. Okay, I see this is being broadcast here in Philadelphia. Is that right? This is live. This is replacing Bhagavatam class.
Yes, on Sundays we watch this in the temple room. Is that okay?
Oh, absolutely. I would have started with Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, though. But anyway, we're not.
No,
Yes,
I gave him a warning. It's not Srimad Bhagavatam. Say.
All right. What is the question there? Is that Kirsten?
Yeah, Hare Krishna. My question
go.
was, during like the uninterrupted time, what do you do when you have someone who's like wanting to spill out everything, but then you have another person who's like very reluctant to like even talk, like they're very avoidant and they're just not wanting to talk much. And I know with the open-ended questions, it's like a way for them to talk more, but what if they're still like not wanting?
That's where, yeah, we are really challenged to get them to talk. It's important. It's essential to get them to talk, or we won't get any resolution. So we get people to talk by asking open-ended questions, very simple ones. What did you think of what you just heard? How did it make you feel? What is your perspective on the issue? What did you hear that you agreed with? What did you hear that you disagreed with? It's up to us to just keep putting those open-ended questions forward, not closed questions. Do you agree with that? But what did you agree with? What did you not agree with? What do you think? And you have to remind them, again, remember, this is confidential. We've all agreed that we're keeping this confidential. It's okay to express how you're feeling. So how are you feeling? Okay. Sometimes, as I said, very humble devotees will just want to say, oh, it's my karma to have to deal with this person. But that does nothing to resolve the emotional elements of the dispute, particularly. It may even resolve, one person may say, okay, whatever, I don't want to fight about it. But then the underlying emotions are still there. So it's very important to follow the process and draw out the views from both parties, even if somebody's willing to acquiesce. Okay?
If
Yeah,
they're still not wanting to.
Well, that is our skill. That challenges our skill, Kirsten, to be able to get people to talk through asking good questions. Always open-ended. What or how? Getting people to express their feelings, getting them to express their opinions and thoughts. And we really want to know, because if we don't succeed, then we failed as mediators. So we really want to know. Yes, Trish? Prema. Premamrita. Premamrita.
I'm thinking, if they just won't, if they just refuse to talk in the exchange part, then maybe say, okay, well, we'll have a private meeting, and then I really need you to talk. Like, is that okay, or is it better just to get it done there?
Yeah, that's a possibility, to have a private meeting. Yeah, we're kind of focused on this a lot. It actually rarely happens. Usually people are quite willing to express their opinions. But if you feel like they're just giving in to avoid the fight, something like that, you could try a private meeting. If you can't get them to express themselves, then the mediation hasn't worked. Okay. All right, any other questions?
Isn't part of it, sorry, I didn't raise my hand. Isn't part of it that the other person needs to hear what the person they're having a dispute with has to say? Like they're like they
Yes.
hear each other. So if they're not willing to talk in front of the other person, it's almost like it's hard to make it work, because the other person is not going to understand their perspective and their feelings.
Right. In the private meeting, we may be able to convince them of the importance of expressing themselves to the other person.
Yeah.
That would be the only reason we would do that. Dr. Michael.
What happened if we have kind of like something that is troubling us with a devotee, or at least we feel troubled personally by behaviors of someone else, and we try to address it to, let's say, a devotee who is in a leading position, and it's just, you don't feel like it's going through, and so you have to repeat it, and then it reaches a point where you feel, should I give up, or what should I do in a situation like this?
Now, you're talking about as a mediator?
As a person in general.
Well, it sounds like you're speaking from the point of view of somebody who's in the dispute, right? And generally, yes, we go into dispute when a dispute with somebody, we're convinced we are right and they are wrong. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a dispute. So in this mediation training, we're learning how to help devotees resolve disputes. Doesn't mean we don't have our opinions, but through the techniques and the practice of mediation, we help other people come out of conflict. And this is a really useful skill among friends, even if we're not in leadership roles, among our family members. Anytime we're seeing people fighting, if we know how to step in and help them then we're empowered to make peace in the world. It's a very empowering skill. So yes, people have fixed positions. Our job is to help unfix them, or to help them see that they'll be better off compromising to maintain a good relationship. We'll get to that though in a minute. Kartikeya, meanwhile, what is your question, Prabhu?
Well, I had a comment. I was thinking that if you're to the point where you're already having exchanges or private meetings, I think that if in the very beginning, you know, we explain to both parties, like that it's voluntary. You know, you're doing, like, the reason why you want to have the mediation is because you want to work together, you want to make things better. And like, if you just remind them why they're even there, why they even like decided to take this step, I think that could also help to get them to speak, like the value of like why they even showed up.
Yes. Yeah, that could be helpful in your opening statement, although I wouldn't encourage you to emphasize it too much. You see, because that makes you look like you've got an agenda. And people are suspicious already. See, one of the most difficult parts of executing a mediation is getting people to come to a mediation. Often you'll find when people are disputing that one person says, yeah, I want a mediation. The other person says, no, I'm not willing to do that. So that is much more of a challenge. So better not to talk about yourself at the outset, other than to say, I'm going to be confidential. Okay. You're just there. It's good if you come in like a blank slate. Look, I don't really know, I don't understand your dispute, and I really want to understand it. So let's start by you explaining to me your side of the story. You see, that's more of the mood. Not like, okay, I'm here to make peace, I'm here to work it out because you're too immature to work it out or whatever. You see, then it looks very condescending. But I really want to know, and I want to hear from both of you, because I value our relationship if it's amongst devotees. You know, I value our relationship. I really want to understand what is going on. But keep yourself out of it beyond that. That would be my advice. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. See, we're executing the discipline, uninterrupted time, exchange, and private meetings. We're just going through a process. And we trust in the process. We don't have to say anything about the process, you see. We just get an agreement. Okay, this is what we're going to do for the next half hour, whatever. Is that all right? Is that all right? Okay, this is what we're going to do. And then you do it. And that just like Prabhupada Priya said, just getting people to listen to each other is a big step forward. And many times that will go far to resolve the issue. They haven't really been listening to each other. So in our disciplined, structured discussion, they listen to each other, then sometimes they come to their own conclusions. All right. So a little bit more then about the private meetings. We'll talk about this in some detail a little later in the presentation. I'm going to go ahead now. When we're picking out the essential issues, it's important to avoid those that are details. And it's important to confirm our concept or understanding of what is at the heart of the dispute with both parties. That's how we as a mediator develop our agenda. I'm going to talk about more of these in all detail in just a moment. So we're just kind of reviewing actually now. We're building agreements and negotiating. We'll talk about how to do that. And then when we're building this agreement, we look for the most easily resolved issues. Okay, so I'm going to go back to these things in a moment. We're going in some depth here. When we're together and we're meeting with both parties, here are some general techniques to keep in mind. First, the mediator needs to remain positive. Okay, good, we're making progress. To emphasize common ground whenever it pops up, and to use silence. Don't be afraid. If you've asked a good open-ended question and it's hanging in the air, let it hang. Don't feel like you got to say something to break the silence. It's amazing how much pressure that can put on someone to think when you ask a good question. So these are general things to know. You're positive, look for common ground, and don't be afraid to let the conversation hang. Be objective. When people start criticizing each other personally, we try to extract what are the actual issues. And we just sort of ignore the insults that they may heap on each other. We try to get down to what are their interests, what is important to them, and not their position. The example I give is that there's only one orange left in the kitchen, and both kids want the orange. So their position is they want the orange. But when we understand the interests, one of them wants the orange to make juice. The other one wants the orange to use the peel in a cake recipe. So actually, if their positions were clear, if their interests were clearly stated, the solution is obvious. So focus on that. What is it that you want to get out of this situation? I understand that you want the orange. What is it you want the orange for? And then as far as possible, use objective criteria. Like, how many oranges have you had in the last week? How many oranges out of the bag did you use? Then finally, this is adding a little bit of personalism, Kartikeya, like you were saying before, but doing it later on in the process. Create doubts about fixed negativity, like, okay, well, if this dispute goes on, what's going to happen? You see the power of a question like that. Once you've been through the steps, the uninterrupted time, the exchange, you're not seeing any movement, you can throw out a question like that. What's going to happen if we don't resolve this? And you get them to both say, well, I guess we're just going to keep on being in an argument. Okay, that's good. Then you can get to the private meetings and scare them even more. Recall past cooperation. Remember, you guys, you worked together on the Rath Yatra last year, how nice that was. What can we do to recreate that mood of cooperation? And finally, this is a really good one. After they've done their uninterrupted time, you challenge them to say, okay, now I want you to describe the other person's position. You heard how they feel. You heard how they see things. Now I want you to describe it back to them. And then you tell me if they miss anything in their description. You see, you have each of them do that. Very powerful technique. Okay, any questions on these things? These are some of the more in-depth skills, nuances that you can use during this first stage. Now, when we get to the private meetings, this is where we use what's called in the center frame there, you see a whatna and a butna. A whatna means a worst alternative to a negotiated agreement, and a butna is the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. Our friend Dr. Zach called this part of the process the chamber of horrors. What you want to do is scare the heck out of them. You do this privately by challenging their position. Look, you insist on having that orange. What's going to happen? What is going to happen if you keep insisting? You and your friend are going to continue having a sour relationship. You and this person you see regularly, you interact with regularly, you're going to continue having this scowl on your face. You're going to continue being unhappy. Challenging like that can be made much easier if you put the confusion on yourself. Look, I'm having a hard time understanding what you expect to get out of being so stubborn or so fixed. Sorry, don't want to use pejorative language. I'm having a hard time understanding what you expect to get out of this conflict by being so determined to stick to your position. I'm having a hard time. I don't see the advantage, how this helps you in any way. Please help me understand how sticking on your position is going to help you. You do this in private, not in front of the other person. But you see how you challenge them, you poke them. And then the worst alternative, look, if we don't figure this out today, if we don't come to a negotiated agreement today, this thing is just going to fester. How is this affecting your japa? How is this affecting your life? How does it feel to be stuck in this position? How long do you want to keep in this position of conflict with the other person? This is the chamber of horrors. In a legal dispute, you can get into more how much money it's going to cost, etc. But we're really talking about devotee disputes. And we all know, isn't it, when we're upset with somebody or somebody's upset with us, it interrupts our japa and makes us feel bummed out. It makes us stew and just regurgitate over and over. I should have said this. He said that. Right? So the whatnot for us in most of our devotee disputes is this. Look, how long do you want to be in this frame of mind? On the other hand, a best alternative to negotiated agreement is going to be, well, okay, if you don't come to an agreement here at this mediation, the best you can expect is to get half an orange. And you're still going to be mad at each other. So, the option of not resolving this today is not nearly as good as resolving it. That's the meaning of a bhatna. The worst is it's going to just fester. The best is, well, you get a little of what you want, or you get what you want and the other person's still going to be mad at you. So what is it going to take for us to come to an agreement that we can both live with? We may not get everything we want, but at least this will be resolved today. We can be done with this. We can come to an agreement. You see, this is the whatna and bhatna ways you can negotiate with people in the private meetings. Finally, hypotheticals. Now, remember, we don't want to inject ourselves too much in it. And sometimes when people are so mad at each other, they can't see a very obvious solution. But rather than say, hey, I have an idea, why don't you do this? You put it as a hypothetical. Say, well, what would happen if you were to compromise in this way? How would that impact you? It's a hypothetical. Look, what would happen? That way, you remain the neutral person you need to be. This high and low values means sometimes a thing that is very insignificant to one party would mean a lot to the other. And so you look for some compromise in a private meeting that a person could make that would make the other person make a compromise that is really important to this person. How about if you tell him you're sorry, and then you ask, and then you ask him if he could please give you this thing that is so important to you. Prem Amrita Devi Dasi.
I'm wondering if at any point during this, probably the private meeting negotiation would be when it's most relevant. Is it ever okay to kind of get philosophical and start to distinguish that maybe this is the false ego and this is what you're falsely identifying with, and like that, or should we save that until they're a little less?
No, that's very good. It's just the way you present it. It's really important. We can't preach to them and remain neutral. So this is where the hypotheticals, the fresh perspectives come in. You can present a philosophical point as a hypothetical. Well, what would happen if you paid obeisances to each other and said, look, our Krishna consciousness is more important to us? How would you feel about that? How would you take that? What takeaway would you have if you did that? How would you feel today? Let's see. Or how would you feel about just acknowledging that you behaved in a way that you regret. How would that score with Trinata Pisi Nicena? See, you see? So this keeps us in a neutral position. It makes the people feel like they are actually getting a fair hearing. If we start preaching, though, then we've moved from the position of neutrality. So this is the art of dispute resolution, turning things that are very obvious to us into appropriate questions. Very good point. Anything else? Okay. Then ending the mediation, we want to have things in writing. We want to have, I think Brihat, you remember when we were in Orlando?
Yes, vividly.
Yeah. We had a wonderful preaching program going. A lot of people coming, everything was looking very promising. So we met with the temple president and came to what we all understood as a clear agreement. And I was thinking it was so clear we didn't need to bother to write it down. Oh, dumb. Because later the temple authorities changed their mind, basically. And we didn't have proof. We said, remember, we agreed on this? Well, we never agreed to that. So I can't express how important, even amongst loving devotees, that we write things down. Srila Prabhupada said to remember means to remember to write it down. So you conclude the whole experience with this, the written agreement. And then a statement there. Here's where you can preach a little bit. Premamrita. Isn't it wonderful to be working together in Lord Chaitanya's service? Now we've agreed that you're going to do this and you're going to do this, and that we're going to move forward on this agreement. Oh, it's a concluding statement, not a statement. It's a statement. Make sure you get that down. Typo. Yes, Prabhupada Priya, were you going to point that out?
No, I didn't even see it until you pointed it out. But I have a question about the written agreement. So I can understand that that's really necessary if you're dealing with, some authoritative devotees. But if it's just like between friends, like two ashram residents that are, gotten a little cat fight or whatever, do they need to do we need to write it out and have them sign it and all that? Or
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Don't
Wow.
make the mistake, the Orlando mistake. It is that not only they have to write it down, they have to sign it. Everybody has a copy. That's really otherwise you're cooking the offering, but you're not offering it to the deities.
And would that written statement be, would it be written on the spot, or would you kind of go away, write it, and then come back?
On the spot.
On the spot.
On the spot. It's good to have a laptop for that reason, but it's
And
not good to use the laptop during the meeting if you can avoid it. That's why the pen and paper for everybody.
so you get them to sit there while you're writing it and make sure that they're okay with what you're writing. Kind of.
Right.
Uh-huh.
Yes, point by point. Okay. So I've understood that A, you're going to do this, and B, is that right? And B, you're going to do this, right? Okay. Here, so I'm writing it down, word for word, just like you agree. And now, if this is what we've agreed on, I need you both to sign it. And then they sign it, and then you can just take pictures of it. You don't have to, everybody takes a picture of it and has it on their phone. Okay. Yeah, we learned that the hard way, really. It was brutal. Obviously, in the law court, we have to do it as a matter of practice, but it applies even in a small dispute. Even in a small dispute, because later you'll see people will want to renege. And if they don't have it in writing, it'll be easy to renege.
Yeah, that's what Premamrita is asking here. What if, you agree on something and then they just don't follow through?
Then you have the foundation for going to a higher authority. Look, such and such agreed to do this, and they're not doing it. They agreed in writing, and still they're not doing it. Then it's a whole different position, you see?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the fruit of our labor in a mediation, is this written agreement. So, yeah, don't want to minimize that. Otherwise, it gets too warm and fuzzy and not practical. Okay, anything else? Yes, Prema?
So after writing and signing, and if they continue, maybe one party continues to like go against the agreement, they're still saying things or whatever. And you have it in writing and you present it to a higher authority. So is that then grounds for like expulsion from the Krishna house? Is that like a consequence that would ensue?
Well, it doesn't put the person in a good light, does it? Then you can go to an authority who may have the authority to remove them from the ashram.
Mhm.
Then the complaint is no longer the dispute. The complaint is this person agreed to something and they're not doing it.
Right.
And they agreed in writing after an extensive discussion.
Mm.
And if we handle ourselves right, you see, as mediators, this aggrieved person cannot say, well, I was forced into this agreement. This is why it's so important to always keep the neutral position. And sometimes I have to say it's brutal because one person is so obviously right and the other person is so obviously wrong. It's hard not to inject yourself and say, what's your problem? But we keep neutral, we keep following the system. That's the idea. Yes, Prabhupada Priya?
Yeah, I'm wondering in that case that somebody's clearly right and one person's clearly wrong, if the written agreement ends up with the wrong person having to make a whole lot of adjustments and the right person kind of getting away scot-free, then could that appear to be unfair to the person who was wrong?
If the person who is, you could say, making all the adjustments can do it from the heart, they are big enough to say the relationship here is more important than this issue. And even though I feel I'm being wronged, I'd rather have that feeling than continue this dispute. That can happen, but it has to come from the heart. It can't be like, I should be feeling this way, but I really don't. You see? I was mediating a dispute once between two sannyasis. And I'm not going to tell you who one of them is, but the other one was Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj. And the other sannyasi was being, from my point of view, so extremely unreasonable. I'll tell you exactly what it was, just so you know. Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj had written some very far out books to attract people in the UFO crowd. And it was very effective. He was getting a lot of people interested in Krishna consciousness by talking about how the demigods and this and that. And so the sannyasi, who is a very conservative person, and she'll remain nameless, was taking a lot of exception to these books. How can he say that the UFOs and the mothership, and look at this and look at that? And he brought the complaint all the way up to the GBC. And so the GBC asked me to mediate it. And I was so impressed with Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj. I mean, I already knew he was a saint, but in this environment, he really shone, his saintliness shone. And he said, well, all right, well, from now on, any books that I write, I'll send them to you first so you can give me input before they're published. It was so amazing. He was so disarming. The other person was just, he had nothing to say. And Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj, being so magnanimous and so genuine in his humility, could do this from his heart. So it's good to challenge a person if you feel they're being overly accommodating. And you can challenge them privately or public or in the group or in the joint session. You can say, look, are you sure you're going to be able to follow this? Because if you can't follow this, then it better not to sign it. What will happen if you sign this today, but then you're unable to follow it? And challenge them. If you have this sense that they're being artificially humble, challenge them by all means.
No, I guess my question was more like, wouldn't the one person feel like it was unfair that they had to make all the changes?
Yeah.
And the other person,
But that's my point. They don't have to do anything. You know, there's nothing in this mediation that says, you know, you have to walk out of here with an agreement. That's why I said it doesn't always work. But it always helps to have discussion. See, so again, if that's where you use your judgment. If the person's being artificially humble and saying, all right, I'll just to get rid of this, I'll agree to all these things, you have to challenge. What's going to happen if you walk out of here and you feel like you've been treated unfairly? How will you deal with that? How is this fair? How is this going to make you feel satisfied? It may make the other person feel satisfied. How will you feel? In fact, it may take a private meeting to really confront them. Somebody may be trying to show, I'm taking the high road, and so this will show the other person how fallen they are. Well, meanwhile, the other person's saying, good, I got everything I wanted from this sucker. You see? So, yeah, we're challenged to be practical and to use our intelligence. Like, wow, is this really a fair agreement? Is this really going to be sustainable? It could go all in favor of one person if the other person can genuinely say, yes, I'm all right with this, like Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj did. But how many Bhakti Tirtha Maharajas are there in our association? Okay, other questions?
Hare Krishna, can I ask a question?
Please, Janaki, go right ahead.
Sorry that I don't have my camera on.
That's okay.
But my question is, during the private meeting, especially with the agitated person, I'm wondering about the weight of, or how important is it to stay neutral, especially if they take a position where they're saying, maybe I don't know what to do with how I feel, and I want your guidance.
Right.
So
Well,
if
then
they start asking, tell me what to do. And then
yeah.
Also, a kind of part of that question is if they're looking for validation, because I feel like a lot of times people just get caught up in their emotion, not the actual problem.
Yes.
And so do we validate them in a way and also validate the other party? Would that be helpful, or is that getting out of a neutral position?
It's getting out of the neutral position, although we can validate by reflective listening, by showing we understand. I see, so you're feeling this and this and this in your own words, putting it in your own words, expressing the other person's feelings as you understand them in your own words. You see? It is, yes, it's
Okay.
essential to remain neutral. It really is the only way we can help the situation. So if people say, first part of your question, please tell me what to do, we have to toss it back to them, saying, well, what would make you feel satisfied in this situation? And then let silence
And what if
reign.
they keep? Yeah.
What?
What if they just keep saying, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know, I'm just feeling so mad?
Then you can throw out hypotheticals. Okay, how would you feel if this were to happen? How would you feel if you gave in on this point, but got that point fulfilled?
Okay.
Okay, that's what the hypotheticals and the high and low values. Those are your two tools in that situation. But don't assume the position of Krishna in the chapter 2.
Yeah. And then I have another question about the statement.
The written statement? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, hang on a second.
Is
I'm
it?
going to go to the next slide. maybe this will help, but go ahead. Yeah, what are your questions?
I'm not able to look at the slide because
Oh,
I had these. I'm sorry.
that's okay. Go ahead.
But my question is, if the two parties are working together and they come up with a statement, even if it's unfair, but both parties are totally okay working together, is it more important to have a statement that might not be so effective, or is it, as a mediator, better to try to encourage a resolution that actually will be effective?
Both. In other words, we may feel that it's unfair. If we were arbitrating, we may have come to a different decision. The criterion is, can the two people in the dispute or the parties in the dispute actually live with this agreement? That's our responsibility. And even if we may not, they can. If they can, then it's okay, then it's a success. So you understand what I'm saying? You have to test it with the parties, not with yourself.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes.
Yeah, anyway, I could tell you stories, but I'm not gonna go there. Right, Prabhupada, what was your
My
question?
question is, what if you're doing the mediation and one of them or both of them, but even if one of them starts getting super emotional to the extent that, you know, they just can't think, you know, they're just like lost their ability to hear or reason or any of that, then do you just push through and keep going like that, or do you give them a chance to calm down, or you pick it up another day, or
Are we talking about in a joint meeting or a private meeting?
both? I guess either one.
Okay. Well, in the private meeting, obviously it's fine. It's good.
Okay.
In a joint meeting, it would be necessary to change the venue. Let's say if a person's too emotional to participate in an exchange, for example,
Mhm.
and the exchange is not happening and one person just lording it over the other, that might be, okay, let's have a private meeting. And then you talk to this person who's most upset. You can isolate and help them try to understand their real interests in the situation.
And then you would try again?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? We're just about at the end here, so.
Yeah, I have a question, Prabhu.
Uh-huh.
Is there ever a situation where you would postpone the meeting to another day if emotions are too high, or would that be like a big no-no?
Well, no, it's not a no-no. It's just important to remember that the disputants are driving the bus here. So we might suggest that. How would you feel about meeting again next Tuesday? Okay, but it's their decision, not yours. You can float the idea, you can offer your services, but it's ultimately their decision. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Kartikeya Prabhu.
Yeah, well, at least because right now we're all like in roles of leadership, or will be in roles of leadership. I just want to bring up this example. When I first became the ashram leader in Gainesville, there was this one student that I was having some little bit of trouble with, right? And then I remember I asked him, I was like, well, you know, would you be open to a mediation, right? And then I told you about it, and you were like, no, why would you do that? You know, like you should try to like, I forget, I think you said it wasn't the right time to suggest that. Like, I think it, like, as a leader, maybe it put this other person in a role to like tell me how to do my service, what I'm doing wrong, and things like this. So I'm just curious as to what is the appropriate and what is an inappropriate time to suggest a mediation.
Can you tell me why in my brilliance, I made that decision? What did I say to you? I don't remember the specific.
Yeah, I don't. Well, the thing is that this student like shortly left like a couple days after that left the
Ah.
ashram. I just forgot about it, but I
Oh,
don't
I
really.
see. It sounds like somebody was being so extremely unreasonable and not responding to simple requests that you were making.
Yeah. That's what
Yeah.
it was like. Yeah.
Yeah, it didn't, I see, yeah. So the criterion objectively would be if devotees are established to some extent, they have some track record, like if they're in the ashram, for example, at least a few weeks, where they're seriously trying to practice Krishna consciousness. Because some people just have a nature where they can't get along with others. And our test, if it's worth our time as ashram leaders, let's put it that way, is like say somebody's been in the ashram or been in the temple and they're well established, they're initiated, and then some newcomer comes along and has some petty disagreement with them. Okay, so then we might consider, is this really rising to the level of mediation being required? As opposed to talking to the new person and helping them understand, well, living in a communal situation like this, sometimes there's little differences, and if you can't tolerate them, this is probably not the right place for you. What do you think? You see what I'm saying? It doesn't, a small egoistic issue from a newcomer against somebody who's a well-established devotee may not rise to the platform of mediation. Now, if the well-established devotee is doing something out of line or unnecessary, agitating the newcomer, that might be a mediation. See, but yeah, we can't, in other words, mediation is an investment of energy, and we don't want to do it at somebody's whim. We want to do it because, or when it's an actual difference of opinion that is interfering with people's advancement in Krishna consciousness. Devotees of goodwill, devotees with sincere intentions, and something has arisen. Conflict is definitely part of our lives as devotees. I mean, look at the Yadu dynasty, right? They killed each other over a petty disagreement. And that was Krishna's plan. So we should understand that amongst devotees, sometimes conflicts arise because there's some Krishna conscious reason for it. And when that happens, we should see them, as Prabhupada said, these are spiritual conflicts. These are actually orchestrated by Krishna for his own reasons. And in their resolution, we will find new insights. Relationships will be enhanced. Just like when you break a bone, when it heals, the knitted bone is stronger than the old one. So yeah, this is a good point you're bringing up. When is it appropriate to use mediation? Not just anytime there's a disagreement, but when it's actually a substantial matter. And when you can see that both parties have sincere intent to serve Krishna and they've come to some impasse in their cooperation. All right? Okay.
I have a question, Prabhu.
Okay.
What happens when there's a conflict between somebody in a position of authority and like a student in the Krishna house?
Good question. In the mediation, we leave aside all positions of authority. But we treat both parties equally, regardless if they're sannyasi, GBC, guru, whatever. And there are disputes that arise between guru and disciple that are definitely good for mediation. But at the beginning of the mediation, that's part of our opening statement, that we say, okay, you may be senior, you may be junior, but here we're just talking. And we set all that aside. And I want to hear the nature of the conflict. So please, both of you, tell me and speak as, we'll speak here as peers in Prabhupada's service. Is that all right? Get the not an agreement. And unless they're very puffed up, senior devotees will easily agree to this, even if they're in positions of authority. But as mediators, yes, it's our job to make sure that we specify there are no hierarchical positions in this discussion. That's a very good point, Alex. I'm glad you brought it up. I'll put that in the opening statement segment next time. Okay, what else have we got here? Okay, well, let me ask then, do you feel like this was helpful? Oh, here's a good question from Kartikeya. When is it appropriate? Okay, well, I guess we just addressed that basically, right? Yeah. Yeah, and again, the hard part is very often getting people to agree to it. Many times, I'd say half the time, you'll have one party agreeable and the other party won't. Okay. I hope, was this helpful? Please tell me. Give me some feedback here for teaching this next time. What was helpful? What was
We
confusing?
didn't really talk about this slide here.
Yeah, we kind of ran out of time. These are two detailed descriptions of the written agreement. Who are the parties, where they will agree to do what they're doing, how it's going to happen, when and what, and then be sure to put it in positive terms. These two persons have come to this agreement today, and not long explanations, but just what are the key points. I'm going to go this way and you're going to go, or this person's going to go left, this person's going to go right. Make sure to give copies on the phone as much as possible. Use the disputant's words. Use their own words at this stage. When we're doing reflective listening, we try to use our own words, but when we're writing the agreement, we want to use their words, not ours. Otherwise, they may say, oh, I didn't say that. And finally, balance actions. Even if one person's making most of the adjustments, make sure to include something that the other person is doing as well. Tulsi, you had your hand raised. Did you have a question?
No, it's okay. I got it. It's fine. Thank you.
Okay. Now, Murari Gupta is looking at things from a different angle of vision. Oh, okay. Any other feedback? Prabhupada Priya, yes.
Just in relation to this, use the disputant's words. So should we ask them, like, so what are you going to do?
Yes.
How are you going to handle this in the future or whatever?
Right, or we could give our understanding. I understand that you're going to do this. What is your understanding? And then whatever they say, write it down, provided it's in line with the agreement as you understand it. Okay. Yes, Murari Gupta, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. The writing it down, getting it, I can really relate to that. There's some situations, where clear agreement, everything was complied and the other people just completely ignored it, and then there was just no accountability. It was like, well, we agreed to this, but yeah, so I really like that. I think that can avoid a lot of future issues.
Excellent. It's a discipline. All of this is a discipline, but my goal is to empower you to do it because it's really helpful in the association of devotees. Conflicts are so draining. As Prabhupada said, no external force can check the Sankirtan movement. It's only dissension within that can stop it. So our job as mediators, we can go far to help reduce dissension within. Brihat Prabhu.
Yes, Prabhu, I really appreciated the understanding that we are in a position of neutrality in this service. You made that very clear. And I wasn't so clear on that beforehand. You were saying you were cautioning against preaching to the disputants, cautioning against setting a new meeting time for them. You said that it's their ship or something like that. So it's really helpful to recognize that fact. Thank you.
Okay, good. Thank you. Good. That's absolutely, that's the skill that we learn more than anything in mediation, because it communicates confidence, it creates trust, and it helps people stick to the outcomes. They don't feel they were railroaded in any way. They're in charge. Yes, Kartikeya Prabhu.
I remember I did one mediation because I took this class when you did it last year at the Nitai course. And so I remember it like doing it and it felt very mechanical at first. Like, okay, like set up the rooms in the way, in this way, put the box of tissues in the middle, paper, pen. Even when I suggested it to the two parties, they were like, we could just have a conversation about it, you know?
Yeah.
No, like let's try this, you know, like let's do this because for over a year you've tried to have many conversations and it hasn't worked out, right? So like let's just try this. And they were both like, I don't know, okay, let's do it. But then afterwards they felt like, wow, I finally got out so many of the things that maybe I would have held back before. It was just so interesting, like to see like a sigh of relief on both parties. And then like now they've just been working together for months and it's been so much nicer.
Oh, good. That's so encouraging. Thank you. You know, that the preparation, you can kind of do that behind the scenes. You just tell them, yeah, meet me here at such and such a time. And then they come in and it's all set up with the pads and the tissues, and the chairs and the private meeting area and all that.
Yeah, there was this document that you shared before where it says like face the chair, like the mediator should be facing Vatsu, like something like this in this way. And
Yeah.
I was looking at the compass, I was like, okay, I gotta put it this way.
That's part two. That's what I learned from last time we gave the course. It was too much information. So I'm stopping here today because I think I just really want to encourage everyone, you can assimilate this and practice this. It's not difficult. It's a discipline, but it's a manageable learning curve. And then there's further fine points we could go into in another time. Yes, Prabhupada Priya.
My experience is that the presence of the mediator also makes a big difference, because when they're presenting their point of view and their feelings and things, you know, they're also feeling like they don't want to be seen as unreasonable by the mediator.
Yes.
Try to present it in a way that's like, you know, rational.
Yes.
Crazy.
Very good point. Just the mere presence of the mediator can inspire rationality and communication. Yeah, that's so many, it's so much in the mode of goodness. Mediation is just so much in the mode of goodness, the whole thing. It really helps dissipate passion and ignorance. And again, mode of goodness means neutral. Yeah, yes, Prihat.
Yeah, I was thinking of the Krishna house value of icha or choice. That the mediator, you clarified, is not making choices for the disputants, but rather creating a space in which the disputants can more reasonably make choices.
Yes, that's right. And in the chamber of horrors, in the private meeting, in the whatnas and butnas, then privately, we can really lay out the consequences of choices. Hey, this is your choice. What's going to happen if you continue making the choice that you are making? What is the logical outcome? What can you expect from that?
It's so interesting. We're just being the vision for them. They've been obscured, and so we're just saying, look, this is the reality.
Yeah. Well, we're saying, what do you see as the reality here? Important, we don't tell them what it is. You know, we just ask them, hey, say, can you see?
Okay, thank you.
Hey, very good.
Sometimes often they find that they've made so many assumptions about each other that they have a whole imaginary view of the person that has nothing to do with the reality of the situation. And then when the person explains their point of view and their actual, you know, reasons for doing things, it's like, really? Oh, that's like an awakening.
Right, just because we had the discipline, right? We've had the discipline of the uninterrupted statements. That's the most powerful thing. If we just do that, get people to sit together in a neutral environment and listen to each other. You're right. Well, good-hearted, well-meaning devotees, they'll come to agreements very often just at that stage. Thank you. Yes, back to Alex Prabhu.
Prabhu, what do you do when the mediator and what's the term? Is it mediatee? Is that the term?
The disputant.
Disputant are of the different gender. So are you supposed to still go in a private meeting, or do you have a third party? But maybe the disputant is not comfortable with having a third party there because it's supposed to be like a personal conversation, right?
Yeah, that would be an exception to the rule of 3 under most circumstances. If the mediator is attracted to that person or vice versa, then it could be, I mean, that the mediator should be savvy enough to make that discrimination. In that case, a private meeting would not be appropriate. You just can't do it. You would need it, or another option is to have a co-mediator. But again, both parties have to agree on that person as a co-mediator, and they have to know what they're doing, and they have to agree to the confidentiality.
You
But
could
yeah,
always maybe
co-mediator is
outside.
legit. But
You could always maybe like go to a park, public park or something, just sit up.
yes, right. The private meeting could be in a public place. That's another option, yes. But you bring up an important point I did want to mention. What happens if one of the disputants wants to come in with 1 or 2 of their buddies or people who share their point of view? Now, that can be all right, provided what? What is our guideline for everything?
It's equal.
No?
They have to agree.
If people agree, yeah, okay. You can say this disputant wants to come and bring this other person. How do you feel about that? And they may say yes or no. If they say no, then it's up to the other person if they're going to have the mediation or not. They may say yes, but then I want to bring a person too. Okay, that generally we want to avoid that. The only people at the mediation ideally are people who are invested in the dispute. Okay, so ideally we just want to deal with it, but sometimes people will feel too insecure and they need it like a support person. And that's okay if the other party agrees. Okay? Yes, Prabhupada Priya.
What if the dispute is not just between one person and another person, but it's like you have a whole like group politics going on where it's like a group of people against a group of people and they're all kind of need to talk.
The main issue is who are the stakeholders? Who are the actual people being affected? And if it's multiple people, then you have to have multiple people. The less, the merrier. Because, again, for every person who's there, there's going to have to be a private meeting. There's going to have to be uninterrupted time. So at the very least, you want to say, okay, groups can come, but you have to select the spokesman. One person can speak, only one person can give feedback to that person. Okay, you forgot to present. Still, it makes it much more complicated. So yeah, whenever possible, just have one-on-one.
Would you say, if it's like a group, that probably would be a good time for just an ishtagosi, like a general thing, where just management steps in, and if they hear both sides of the party, then in the ashram setting at least.
Well, Mao Tse-tung, Uvacha, Mao famously said that he would never go into a meeting that he did not know the results of in advance. So trying to do a mediation like that in a group setting can be very volatile. It's much better to do it in a controlled environment because you don't know what may happen, and it'd be easy for it to get out of hand. and for you to lose the ability to control the conversation with your questions. Right, so much better to isolate spokesman for groups. Ask each side to appoint one person who represents them best and then mediate with just those two. Then you leave it up to them to communicate to the group. You see? Yeah, I have never had any luck with group mediations. It's just one person shoots off and then it goes in the whole different, you can't channel the energy. Now, great dispute resolution resolvers may be able to do that, but it's very advanced. We just mostly want to get people to talk to each other. Okay, I think we're good for today then. I hope you found this helpful, and you remember next time you're in a dispute, just separate or hear out the uninterrupted time, the exchange, and the private meetings, and the written agreement. Take these things away this morning. You have a lot of good tools to start with in bringing peace to the Krishna consciousness movement. Haribol. Jai, all glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Sorry, Prabhupada. Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Thank you, Kalakantha Prabhu.
Thank you, Kalakantha Prabhu.
Pleasure. Haribol.
Hare Krishna.